I feel unsafe around stupid people like Sonny, whose families own slaves.
Yeah.
Except in that case, that's not a feeling. That is true.
So, Tomi, what led to that bashing on The View?
Well, there is a woman over the weekend who took it upon herself to research my family history in hopes of digging up some kind of a gotcha moment, a gotcha angle to validate illegal immigration and open borders. And what she found was really shocking, guys. She found that my family who came here in the 1800s from Norway and Germany, that they spoke Norwegian and German.
Okay.
And really what she did is prove that my family came here legally, but what she was hoping to do was try to call me a hypocrite for believing in merit-based.
What happens when a political debate suddenly turns into a showdown over family history? That is exactly what seemed to happen when Sonny Hostin confronted Tomi Lahren over immigration. Hostin brought Lahren's ancestors and their experience as immigrants generations ago, seemingly hoping to expose a contradiction in Lahren's position. But instead of getting defensive, Lahren stayed composed and turned the criticism into an argument for her own view of legal and merit-based immigration. What looked like a carefully prepared gotcha moment quickly became an unexpected television twist.
What would happen if all the women took a ladies' week off and they went to Venus? 4 billion women just went to Venus for a ladies' week, right?
Okay.
All right. And they came back after a week. How many of these problems would still exist?
Immigrants come over here and they don't know anything and they're dragging us down because we all come from immigrants, including you, Tomi Lahren.
She talks about low skills. What exactly are her skills?
Her second great-grandmother had been here for 10 years, yet spoke no English. Oh my gosh. 1930 census says Tommy's 3 times great-grandmother had been here for 41 years and still spoke German. She didn't speak English either. She doesn't even know her own history. She certainly doesn't know this.
So who actually came out looking exposed? The conversation started with familiar arguments about immigration, border security, and legal entry. Then the discussion took a very personal turn. Hostin referenced Lahren's ancestors and their inability to speak English when they first arrived, presenting it as evidence against Lahren's position. The strategy was obvious. If Lahren's own family were immigrants who initially spoke another language, why should she criticize today's immigration system? But there was an immediate problem with that argument. Lahren did not deny her family's history. Instead, she embraced it. She pointed out that her ancestors came from Europe generations ago and used their experience to argue that immigration then and the current immigration debate are not necessarily identical situations. Suddenly, the attempted attack had become part of Lahren's defense.
With DNA, 23andMe, because I cannot believe the detail on your background that they were able to get.
Well, I don't have to. She did all the research for me, so I'm sure my family is very appreciative.
What about Joy saying, though, what are your skills? It's beyond research. It is personal. It is mean.
Well, of course, this is classical Joy Behar, but I would like to ask Joy Behar what her skills are, because perhaps we could swap stories. I know I watch Joy, and she seems like a highly skilled lady, but for her to attack me, that's really...
If this debate has your attention, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe, because what happened next completely changed the direction of the conversation. Lahren remained remarkably calm while the discussion became increasingly personal. Rather than getting trapped in a debate about whether her ancestors spoke English, she shifted the focus back to her broader argument about legal immigration, work, documentation, and opportunity. Her position was that being a nation of immigrants does not automatically mean every immigration policy from one era can be directly compared with another. That response gave her supporters exactly what they wanted. Instead of looking cornered, Lahren appeared to be using the criticism to reinforce her own message. And, predictably, the internet took over from there. Clips circulated, arguments multiplied, memes appeared, and social media users turned a television discussion into another massive political showdown.
What bothers him so much?
Well, it's not just me, it's anybody who advocates for merit-based immigration or has an issue with open borders. And again, just like you said, they don't seem to understand that we on the right believe in immigration. We understand that we are a nation of immigrants, and I am proud of my heritage. However, I do believe that the immigration crisis of today is apples to oranges from what it was in the 1800s when immigrants came to this country legally, were documented, worked for themselves, asked for nothing, and built a life and a family. That has nothing to do with the illegal immigration crisis of today that we must deal with. But
Then Greg Gutfeld entered the conversation, and the tone changed almost immediately. Instead of treating the ancestry argument like a serious political revelation, he turned the entire situation into comedy. His broader point was simple. Using someone's family tree as a political weapon can become complicated very quickly. Almost every American family has an immigration story somewhere in its history, and many ancestors arrive speaking languages other than English. That makes ancestry a complicated foundation for judging someone's modern political position. The moment the discussion moved away from policy and toward relatives from generations ago, it stopped feeling like a traditional immigration debate. It started looking more like political entertainment, complete with jokes, reactions, and a television audience waiting for the next dramatic moment.
I have heard a lot of dumb crap come out of blue states, but this one is a real doozy. Get this. As of January 1st, New Jersey teachers will no longer be required to pass a basic literacy.
Back on the set, the discussion appeared to be spiraling further away from the original issue. Viewers could easily have wondered whether they were watching a policy debate or a reality show confrontation. Hostin had made the discussion personal, but the attention eventually shifted back toward Lahren. Lahren did not appear interested in matching the emotional intensity. She stayed focused on her position and continued making the distinction between legal immigration and the immigration challenges being debated today. That consistency helped her supporters frame the exchange as a win. Her critics, however, saw the situation differently and argued that the conversations exposed weaknesses in her broader argument. Either way, social media quickly turned the disagreement into another political scoreboard, with both sides declaring victory.
I started out at One America News with an 80-something-year-old male boss who called me a bimbo pretty freely. That was a different experience. I went to The Blaze and I worked for Glenn Beck, who I had to end up getting in a lawsuit with because he tried to fire me for saying I was pro-choice when I went on The View. So it's been a different experience.
This is where the larger issue becomes important. Immigration is an enormously complicated subject involving law, economics, security, family, opportunity, and human stories. Yet, television debates often reduce those complicated questions to a few dramatic exchanges designed to create viral clips. Hostin had an opportunity to make a broader point about how different immigrant families have different experiences. She could have explored the fact that language, legal status, and cultural assimilation have changed dramatically across generations. Instead, the ancestry angle became the centerpiece of the confrontation, and once that happened, the internet did exactly what it always does. People chose sides, posted reactions, created memes, then argued over a short television segment without necessarily addressing the deeper policy questions underneath it.
People have to wonder, where does Sunny Hostin get her opinions?
Yeah.
Like you said, and it's obviously from her husband. She has to tell her what to say on The View, because without it, she's got nothing up there. She's not very bright. But the problem with her is that she went full racist. She injected skin color into a fairly generic behavior seen in all spouses, regardless of skin color. People marry, they listen to each other, they have something in common with them, they share their political views. She just didn't want to upset her husband by saying her husband makes her do everything, and then she'd have to accuse him of being a racist. Because if he told her that this is what white women do, then he's a racist.
Perhaps the most striking part was how little Lahren seemed to need to raise her voice. She remained relatively composed while repeatedly returning to her argument about legal immigration, work, documentation, and opportunity. Whether someone agrees with that position is a separate question. But rhetorically, she managed to turn a personal challenge into an opportunity to explain her worldview. That is also what made the exchange revealing. Once a political argument becomes centered on someone's ancestors, the original policy discussion can disappear almost instantly. Immigration is personal for millions of people, but turning those personal histories into ammunition can create more heat than understanding. By the time the segment moved on, the tension was obvious. The question was no longer simply about immigration policy. It had become a fight over identity, ancestry politics, and who could control the narrative.
Obsession with race gets thrown back in her face. Today's video comes to us from Sunny Hostin. Sounds like a town. We're in sunny Hostin. She was on PBS's Finding Your Roots, a show dedicated to researching celebrity ancestry. For context, Sunny is a staunch supporter of reparations and has made a fortune spewing nonsense about white privilege and racial justice. Well, turns out She's not as oppressed as she claims she is. She's actually the descendant of slave owners from Europe. Here's how she...
And the fallout did not end when the cameras stopped. Social media quickly became the second stage of the debate. Some viewers defended Hostin and argued that family history provided useful context. Others accused her of taking the discussion too personally. Laren's supporters, meanwhile, embraced the attention and circulated her responses as evidence that she had handled the confrontation effectively. Gutfeld also joined the conversation with his familiar sarcastic approach. He treated the ancestry argument as an opportunity to point out how complicated everyone's family history can become when politics starts digging through generations of relatives. The result was predictable. More clips, more arguments, more jokes, and another political disagreement transformed into online entertainment.
Wow. I'm a little bit in shock. I just always thought of myself as Puerto Rican, half Puerto Rican. I didn't think I was, my family was originally from Spain and slaveholders.
Yeah. So how are you feeling, my friend?
I think it's actually pretty interesting that my husband and I have shared.
Gutfeld's criticism centered on what he saw as the irony of attacking someone through ancestry without considering how complicated the history of almost every family can be. That argument quickly became part of the online reaction. Short clips spread, commentators picked sides, the original discussion about immigration became secondary to the question of who had delivered the better comeback, and that is the strange cycle of modern political television. A serious topic enters the studio, personalities collide, someone delivers a memorable line, then the internet spends the next several hours debating the moment instead of the underlying policy. What began as a discussion about borders and immigration eventually became a conversation about relatives who lived generations ago. The dramatic moment may have been entertaining, but it did little to resolve the complicated questions surrounding immigration today.
I have a question of my own. Do you lock your doors at home? At your residence, do you have a lock on your door? Do you use that lock?
I do. Yeah, I do.
You have an alarm?
And why is that? I mean, you lock your door. You lock your door because you want to know who's coming into your home. It's not because you hate the people outside. It's because you love the people inside. Well, that's what needs to be done with the United States of America. That's why we have a border. We have a right to know who's coming into our country and why.
Tyrus didn't necessarily need to add much after that. The moment had already created its own momentum. In fact, his relatively steady presentation made the contrast even more noticeable. One side appeared measured and deliberate. The other seemed increasingly focused on responding to pressure. And that difference in presentation became part of what viewers were discussing, turning tone and temperament into subjects of their own. The aftermath followed a familiar pattern. Trending topics appeared, commentary multiplied, and social media users began dissecting every detail. And some focused on policy, while others focused almost entirely on the delivery and emotional intensity of the exchange. But certain political moments survive because they create a lasting emotional impression. Their importance is not always determined by the size of the original controversy, and sometimes the...
Why do you think you've resonated with so many people?
I think, in large part, I represent Middle America. So you've got the two coasts, and those individuals seem to kind of just talk to each other. And then you've got all of Middle America right there that's dying to have a voice. They don't really feel like they have one. They're not represented, beyond their communities. So I think they watch me and they say, well, she speaks like I do. She thinks like I do. She seems to maybe get it like I do. And I think that's why it's resonated. And also, I do something very different. There's not a whole lot of young conservative women out there. And so I provide that.
At some point, political debates can start feeling less like discussions and more like a contest to uncover someone's family tree. When that happens, the original subject gets buried. The bigger story here was not simply Lahren versus Hostin. It was the way modern political conversations can quickly turn complicated issues into emotional entertainment. Immigration should involve serious conversations about laws, borders, legal pathways, economic needs, humanitarian concerns, and enforcement. Instead, television panels can become focused on who can deliver the strongest moment before the commercial break. That is why these segments perform so well online. They are already structured like social media content. A confrontation creates a clip, the clip creates outrage, the outrage creates another round of coverage.
Democrats really want to die on the hill of bringing back plane loads of criminal, illegal alien gang members.
But you haven't proven that they're criminals.
Please.
That's the problem.
Be my guest.
Honestly, look, I will be the first.
And here is the real twist. When one person brings family history into a political argument and the other responds with prepared policy talking points, understanding usually gets pushed aside. Everyone speaks. Everyone reacts. But very little gets resolved. Hostin approached the exchange from an emotional and personal angle, while Lahren responded by returning to her established arguments about legal and merit-based immigration. Their supporters could walk away believing they had won, but the deeper question remained untouched. What should America's immigration system actually look like? Instead, viewers received viral clips, angry posts, jokes, and competing narratives. That is increasingly the formula for political talk television. Bring together strong personalities, create tension, let the audience choose sides, and move on before the hardest questions can be fully explored. And that is what made this exchange so revealing. The family history confrontation may have generated attention, but it did not settle the immigration debate. It simply created another viral political moment. In the end, there was no clear winner because the real issue was never fully debated. What viewers saw was two competing narratives colliding in front of an audience, followed by the inevitable explosion online. The bigger lesson is simple. When politics becomes more focused on winning the moment than understanding the issue, going viral can become more important than having a thoughtful conversation.